Russian military vehicles have been seen on a train close to the Ukrainian border. Russia continues to deny it's providing military support to pro-Russia separatists in Ukraine. Well, Charles Stratford is live for us in Moscow. So, sketchy reports. What more can you tell us about the details?
Well, that's right, Sammy. Russia has for a long time now been denying any involvement in supporting separatist fighters in eastern Ukraine, both with respect to troop numbers and military equipment. But we'd heard reports that there was a build-up of Russian forces and Russian military equipment in the area close to the Ukrainian border. We'd also seen photographic evidence as such. So we basically travelled down to that region, and this is what we found.
Russian military equipment on a train close to the Ukrainian border. Al Jazeera has no way of verifying where these vehicles are being moved to or from. The equipment includes armoured personnel carriers, medical supply vehicles and tanks. The Russian military insignia and number plates have been removed or seemingly painted over. We drove out of town to an area where we had heard there was a makeshift military camp. Across the fields we noticed clouds of dust in an area around what looked like a farm. Large military vehicles were moving in convoy along the mud tracks. Around 10 kilometres behind me is the border with eastern Ukraine. Now, the Russian military say that the reason why there's so many troops and military equipment in this area is because it's conducting military exercises, and it categorically denies that its troops have been fighting alongside separatist fighters across the border. There have been Russian military bases in this area for many years. The government described a question on whether it was preparing for an attack as completely inappropriate. The army has recently been conducting exercises around 1,000 kilometres from here. And NATO has been conducting its own exercises at the same time in northern Sweden, Norway and Finland. Russia has recently included the death of military personnel on what it describes as special operations in peacetime as a state secret. Disclosing details about a soldier being killed could now put you behind bars. The government says the law has nothing to do with the conflict in Ukraine. And a recently released report details what it says is proof the Russian military is operating in eastern Ukraine. One of the authors of that report, opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, was shot dead in Moscow before it was published. A close associate of Nemtsov is in hospital fighting for his life. It's suspected he may have been poisoned. A February ceasefire between the separatists and the Ukrainian army is still holding, but with reported violations being committed by both sides. And Russia says it has the right to conduct military maneuvers wherever it wants in its territory, despite the sensitivity of the time and place.
Well, I've spoken in the last few minutes to an independent military analyst here in Moscow, and I put it to him I asked him what his reaction was to what we've seen down there. He was very candid in his reply. He seems to think it's two things that are going on. He said that the troop build-up that we're seeing is to do with the yearly rotation of soldiers. Obviously, here in Russia, soldiers will serve for a year in the army, and then new troops replace them. So he's saying that on the one side, this is happening down there. But then when I described the kind of military equipment that we've seen, and I pushed him as to what he thought of the fact that a lot of this equipment had no Russian insignias on it, the number plates had seemingly been painted over. And he said that, and these are in his words, it seemed to be a preparation for what he described as an inevitable summer campaign in support of another separatist push in Donbass. He said that he thought that the separatists were going to be looking for pretexts to up their game again and attack Kiev's military, the Ukrainian forces, again over the summer. And he used the examples of what happened last year. It was a similar scenario. After a ceasefire, there was a lull, there was a summer campaign, again a ceasefire in the winter, that ceasefire that was first Minsk agreements before a winter campaign started. Now, as I say, these are his words. The Russian military continues to deny that it's up to anything untoward down there on those borders and that it has supported troops in the past. It's also interesting that yesterday I spoke to a local man when we were in that region who wanted to remain nameless, didn't want to go on camera, and he described how his son served in the military last year and how determined he was to get his son away from that area so he didn't have to serve in that area. So he says because he was scared that inevitably his son would be asked to serve in Ukraine. Now, just as a last point here, President Putin, as I say, continues to deny that his soldiers, are fighting in eastern Ukraine, and he describes them as being volunteer forces. He says there are no active servicemen and women fighting in eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian government says that it has two Russian soldiers that it captured on Ukrainian soil, one of which, so the Ukrainian government says, has admitted to being an active serviceman when he was captured in Ukraine. So there's a lot of mixed messages here, but certainly what we saw in that region over the last 24 hours suggests evidence that not all the questions, at least, are being answered completely truthfully.
All right, thanks so much. Charles Stratford there.